Peace, blessings, and abundance, everyone. Welcome back to Sacred Birth Sessions. I am Jessica Pierre, birth doula, educator, and creator of the Sacred Birth Blueprint. This space is for women who want more than just surface level birth advice and who want to feel informed, grounded, and confident, not blindsided when it's time to give birth. So, take a breath, settle in, and let's get into today's session. Let's talk about something that happens all the time. Women go into labor saying they don't want an epidural and then end up getting one. And I want to be very clear from the very beginning, this is not about right or wrong. Getting an epidural is a personal choice, so there's no judgment either way. But what I've seen over and over and over again is a lot of women don't plan to get one, but they end up getting one anyway. And it's usually not just about the pain, because a lot of women go into it thinking, I have a high pain tolerance, so I'll be fine. But labor is not just physical. It is mental, emotional, environmental, and spiritual too. We literally have life passing through us. We are portals. And one of the biggest things that I see is the lack of preparation. So not just knowing what labor is, but knowing how to move through it. Because when contractions start building, if you don't have the tools, the support, or a way to stay grounded, it can definitely feel overwhelming very, very quickly. And like in early labor, contractions can start off like period cramps and things like that. But once you get into active labor, that's when they really start to amp up. And this is where you need more than just physical support. And sometimes you may or may not be able to talk through your contractions, but this is where you start to build up into like active labor. And active labor is usually around 5 to 6 centimeters dilated. And then this is where most moms start contemplating some type of pain management, whether that's IV pain meds or nitrous oxide, the laughing gas, or they'll go straight to the epidural. So another big factor is exhaustion. Labor can be very long. And if you're tired, if you haven't slept, if your energy is low, and then being in the hospital setting, you're discouraged to eat, when nourishment is supposed to be provided for you to be able to sustain long labor. So this definitely affects you as well. So you're hungry and then you probably end up turning hangry. There's a lot that goes on, and that changes how you're experiencing everything. And sometimes it's not even, I can't handle the pain. It's literally just, I'm exhausted. I need a break. These contractions are coming back to back. What is going on? And then there's your environment. Being in a space that feels clinical. People are coming in and out of the room just to talk to you, to make sure baby's on the monitor, taking vital signs. And then if you're high risk, that's a whole nother ballgame, because you'll have all types of team members coming in and trying to have conversations and running tests and making suggestions to kind of get the best birth experience that you can. But it's just a lot. You're constantly being monitored. And then sometimes you have the hospitals that have Bluetooth monitors, so you're not necessarily tied to the bed, but either way, that just being kind of locked in the room, it definitely can take you out of your zone. And then sometimes suggestions come up like, do you want an epidural? Do you want to consider that? And in that moment, it can honestly feel like the easiest option, because again, you're tired, you're exhausted, you're hungry, you just want to get through this. I actually had a mom who did not want an epidural. We discussed all of it. She did not want it. And then things were getting intense. She had her eyes closed for most of the time, tensing up through each of the contractions and trying to concentrate and breathe. And the nurse came in as I was standing next to her, next to the mom laying in the bed. And the nurse came and kind of scooched her way in the middle of us and sat on the bed and kind of like moved me out of the way and was like, hey, I know you can do this, but you can get an epidural if you want. Even though on the birth plan that we created, epidural was not checked on that. So initially, the mom didn't answer. She kind of kept her eyes closed, trying to think. And then a contraction came, and we sat through the contraction. And the nurse asked her again, like, hey, do you want that epidural? And with her eyes closed, mom answered no. Now, after that, the nurse stepped out of the room. And when she stepped out of the room, like, I personally, honestly was irritated because we had this conversation. She said no before, and then the nurse came in, and mom and I had a brief discussion, and she ended up not wanting the epidural, but felt like she was being pressured. So in that instance, I asked her if she would she be okay with talking to the nurse when she came back in to have a cervical exam to see how far dilated she was, because honestly I felt like she was further along than anybody else thought she was. So not too long after, the nurse brought in what I believe was the charge nurse, and the charge nurse sat at the foot of the bed and was like, hey mom, I know you can do this, but I just wanted to reiterate, you do have the option to get an epidural. And again, we sat through a contraction, kind of let her ride that out, and mom was about to give in. And then she's like, hey, before we do this, can I get checked? Can I get checked? And they called the midwife in. The midwife did the cervical check, and she was fully dilated, ready to push. So she was able to have her birth because she asked that question. Because honestly, they probably would have called in for the epidural, waiting for the anesthesiologist. She would have had the baby either way without the epidural, because sometimes it can take a while. I had another mom who wanted a completely natural birth. She was doing it. We were doing the movements. We went into the bathroom and sat on the toilet. We did massage and double hip squeeze, and she loved the double hip squeeze. And walking her back to the bed, the contractions got even more intense. And at that point, she was 8 centimeters, and she was like, give me the epidural, please. Just no, give me that. Where are these people? So the anesthesiologist was called and everything like that. But again, anesthesiologists can be in the OR with a C-section, and then they have how many other rooms that they have to be in. So they were taking a little while. Plus, at that time, you had to get 2 bags of IV fluids and everything like that before they can do the epidural. So I tried my best with her partner, with the labor and delivery nurse, to keep her as comfortable as possible through each contraction. But the labor and delivery nurse and I gave each other the eye, like, yeah, she's not gonna make it. the anesthesiologist is not gonna make it in time. So said, so done. So we got her back in the bed, and she actually gave birth on hands and knees like she wanted to, within like 30 minutes of her starting to beg for the epidural. So all of this is parts that people don't think about. It's a lot. So the decision isn't being made in a quiet and calm moment most of the time, unless it's made earlier in labor. It could be made in the middle of contractions, or again when you're tired and when emotions are high at the end of the day. And that's a completely different headspace that you probably should be in to make those type of decisions. So it's not about discipline, and it's not about being strong enough. At the end of the day, it is about being prepared for that moment. Because if you go into labor, again, without the tools, without the support, or any type of plan on how to handle those moments in the moment, it's easy to feel like things are happening faster than you can keep up with. And that's what I go through with a lot of the moms that I encounter. Like, we focus on things like this, to make sure that they're just not going into labor hoping for a certain experience, but they're actually feeling prepared for what might actually require of them in the moments, those heavy moments. So it's a lot to consider. But again, if you think about these things beforehand and prepare, come up with a plan, get your support team together, it can be an easier decision to make in those moments. You'll have lots of different options of, how to cope with contractions in that time. Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to prove anything. It's to feel important in these decisions. It's to feel supported with whatever decision you make. And when you're prepared, your decisions will feel more intentional versus reactive. So prepare ahead of time. Now, if this episode helped you feel more clear, a little more grounded, or a little bit more prepared, then I'm glad you're here. Please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next session. And if this resonated with you, please share it with someone you know that might need it too. I'll talk to you in the next one. Peace, blessings, and abundance.